The lunch crowd barely noticed when the first chair crashed across the polished restaurant floor. Forks froze in midair, conversation stopped, and every eye turned toward the corner where three wealthy-looking men had surrounded an elderly stranger who had accidentally sat at the wrong reserved table. The old man trembled as insults rained down on him, his weathered hands shaking while he tried to explain his mistake. Most people looked away, pretending not to see. But one man quietly stood up from a nearby table, placing a gentle hand on his young son's shoulder before walking toward the growing confrontation. No one in that room could have imagined that the quiet single father they were about to mock would completely change everyone's lives before the sun went down. Before we continue this unforgettable story, if you believe kindness still matters, that standing up for strangers can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from, share this story with someone you care about, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy for more emotional stories that remind us humanity is never out of fashion. The man who stepped forward was named Rowan Mercer, a 38-year-old single father whose calm appearance hid years of sacrifice. Dressed in simple jeans and a faded blue shirt, he looked like someone who worked long hours just to make ends meet. His 8-year-old son, Callum, quietly watched from their table with complete trust in his father's every move. Rowan had raised Callum alone since losing his wife 5 years earlier in a tragic highway accident. Every morning started before sunrise, every dollar was carefully counted, and every evening ended with bedtime stories that reminded his son kindness was the only wealth nobody could ever steal. That Saturday afternoon was supposed to be special. Rowan had promised Callum a rare lunch downtown after months of saving. The restaurant was far nicer than anything they usually visited, but Callum had recently earned top marks at school and Rowan wanted to celebrate his son's hard work. It was one of those bright summer days when sunlight spilled through enormous windows, making everything seem warmer and more hopeful than usual. Across the dining room, the elderly stranger had unknowingly taken a seat at a table reserved for three influential businessmen. Instead of politely correcting him, they chose humiliation. They laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear, calling him useless and accusing him of trying to get free food. The old man's face turned pale with embarrassment. He repeatedly apologized, explaining that his eyesight had become poor and he simply couldn't read the reservation sign. The restaurant staff hesitated. Nobody wanted to upset wealthy regular customers known for spending thousands every month. Fear silently defeated compassion. Rowan reached the table and calmly asked the men to let the elderly gentleman move without further embarrassment. His voice never rose, but confidence filled every word. Instead of calming down, the businessmen turned their anger toward him. They mocked his clothes, questioned whether he could even afford the meal, and laughed at the idea that someone who looked so ordinary would lecture them about respect. Callum watched nervously, his small hands gripping the edge of his chair. Rowan briefly looked back and smiled, silently telling his son everything would be all right. That reassuring smile carried years of fatherhood, promising protection even when the outcome was uncertain. The oldest businessman shoved Rowan's shoulder and sarcastically warned him to return to his own table before making a mistake he would regret. The restaurant became painfully quiet. Even the servers stopped moving. Rowan didn't push back. He simply helped the elderly man stand, pulled out another empty chair nearby, and invited him to join his own table instead. Callum immediately smiled and offered the old gentleman his untouched dessert without being asked. The old man's eyes filled with tears. He had expected more insults. Instead, he found unexpected kindness from complete strangers. Many customers quietly began noticing the contrast. One table displayed wealth without compassion. The other displayed very little wealth but unlimited dignity. The businessmen couldn't tolerate becoming the center of silent judgment. They loudly demanded that management remove Rowan, claiming he had ruined their dining experience. Moments later, the restaurant manager hurried over, visibly anxious. Before saying anything, he politely asked Rowan if he would mind stepping outside to avoid further conflict. Rowan looked disappointed but remained respectful. He gathered his son's backpack, thanked the elderly gentleman for sharing lunch with them, and prepared to leave without creating a scene.
Just as they reached the entrance, several black luxury SUVs quietly pulled into the parking area outside. Their arrival attracted immediate attention. Security personnel stepped out first, followed by an elegantly dressed woman in her 60s whose graceful presence instantly changed the atmosphere. The restaurant owner rushed outside, greeting her with enormous respect. She was Vivian Ashcroft, founder of one of the nation's largest charitable foundations and majority investor in several respected businesses throughout the city. Although many recognized her face from newspapers, few knew she often visited restaurants anonymously to observe how ordinary people were treated. Her eyes immediately settled on the elderly gentleman sitting beside Callum. Without hesitation, she hurried toward him and gently embraced him. The restaurant fell completely silent. The elderly stranger was her older brother, Alistair, a retired history teacher who suffered from declining vision after years of illness. He had insisted on coming alone that afternoon because he wanted to maintain his independence. Vivian listened quietly as witnesses explained everything that had happened. Several customers pointed toward Rowan. Others pointed toward the businessmen. Within minutes, the entire truth became clear. Vivian slowly approached Rowan, whose only concern remained making sure Callum wasn't frightened by the unexpected attention. She thanked him sincerely for protecting her brother when everyone else had remained seated. She admitted that kindness shown without expecting recognition was becoming increasingly rare. The businessmen suddenly realized who she was. Their confident smiles disappeared. One hurriedly apologized. Another blamed misunderstanding. The third insisted emotions had simply become heated. None of their excuses carried any weight anymore. Vivian gently reminded them that character reveals itself most clearly when dealing with those who appear powerless. Money could purchase influence, luxury, and comfort, but it could never buy integrity. The restaurant owner publicly apologized to Rowan and his son for failing to support them. Several employees lowered their heads, ashamed that fear had prevented them from doing what was right. Meanwhile, little Callum quietly asked whether the elderly gentleman was feeling better. That innocent question touched everyone far more deeply than the speeches being made around them. Alistair smiled warmly and admitted he hadn't felt that respected in a very long time. Instead of discussing punishment, Vivian invited Rowan and Callum to finish their lunch as honored guests. Rowan accepted only after making sure the elderly gentleman remained comfortable. During lunch, Vivian learned about Rowan's life. She discovered he worked 2 jobs while volunteering every weekend at a neighborhood youth center. Few people knew he often repaired bicycles for children whose families couldn't afford new ones. He never posted about his kindness online, never expected awards, and never believed anyone would notice. His greatest achievement, he quietly said, was simply raising a son who understood compassion before success. Callum listened proudly while finishing his sandwich. Vivian found herself thinking about her late husband, who had always believed companies should be built around people instead of profits. She realized Rowan embodied the values countless leadership seminars tried unsuccessfully to teach. Weeks passed after that remarkable afternoon. Rowan returned to ordinary life, assuming the experience had ended with a memorable lunch. Then one morning he received an unexpected invitation. Vivian asked him to visit the headquarters of her charitable foundation. Confused but curious, Rowan accepted. Inside the impressive building, Vivian explained that she wanted him to oversee a nationwide community outreach initiative focused on helping struggling single parents rebuild their lives through education, employment support, and childcare assistance. She wasn't hiring him because of business experience. She was choosing him because genuine compassion couldn't be taught inside boardrooms. At first, Rowan hesitated. He had never managed a large organization. He doubted himself. Vivian smiled gently and reminded him that true leadership begins the moment someone protects another person despite having nothing to gain. Months later, Rowan's programs transformed hundreds of lives. Single mothers found stable jobs. Fathers learned valuable skills. Children received tutoring, meals, and emotional support.
Communities once divided by hardship slowly rediscovered hope. Every decision Rowan made reflected the lesson Callum watched inside that restaurant: never measure someone's worth by appearance.
One afternoon, Rowan returned to the same restaurant with Callum and Alastair.
This time there were no cameras.
No reporters. No applause.
Only quiet gratitude. The manager personally welcomed them.
Employees treated every guest with equal respect.
A framed photograph near the entrance displayed a simple sentence inspired by that unforgettable day.
Every stranger deserves dignity before judgment.
Countless customers paused to read those words without ever knowing the full story behind them.
As Rowan watched Callum laughing with Alastair over dessert, he realized something extraordinary.
Standing up for one frightened stranger hadn't only protected a single man. It had reshaped an entire community, inspired businesses to rethink their values, and given countless struggling families opportunities they never believed possible. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy so together we can spread more stories that remind the world compassion is stronger than cruelty. Special request: please comment the word kindness below if you believe one small act of courage can change someone's entire life. As the afternoon sun filled the restaurant with golden light, Rowan looked at his son and quietly smiled. Wealth may impress people for a moment, power may silence a room, and status may open expensive doors, but only kindness leaves footprints on human hearts that never fade. On that ordinary daytime lunch, one father simply refused to ignore injustice. Because of that single decision, strangers became family, hope replaced humiliation, and one simple act of compassion proved that sometimes the wrong table on the right day becomes the place where destinies are forever changed.